家好同志们. Welcome back to the Great Proletarian Cultural Revolution podcast with your host, Drew Smith. Back in the studio after a very long, hot, sweaty, and expensive summer vacation. I mean, I had a good rest, spent it almost entirely with the partner. We went to Beijing to meet her paternal side of the family, as you know. Had a great time, really. Saw all the major sites and a few extra ones that I'd never seen before. I wanted, at one point during that time, to go to the campuses of some of the major battlegrounds of the Red Guard factional fighting, but honestly, my partner has absolutely no interest in the Cultural Revolution, and honestly, one point, it was just too hot to go out. Beijing is one of those places where, despite being far north, it has a very hot and humid summer, and their summers in Beijing are long. If we're talking in Fahrenheit, I'm talking high 90s to low 100s with 90% humidity for weeks on end. And then add hordes and hordes of tourists who haven't been able to go out traveling for the past few years due to COVID. And needless to say, it was not my favorite time I've ever been to Beijing. I've been to Beijing a few times now, and definitely was not my favorite time to come. But we still had fun, and it was a good family bonding experience, so that's what matters, I guess. But, and guess what? We are now well over 2,500 subscribers on Spotify. Hooray, hooray. So next thing we're going to do is we're going to launch on YouTube, do the static image plus audio thing and see if that helps broaden the podcast outreach. I know a few history podcasts like the China History Podcast that Laszlo Montgomery does. It actually gets a sizable chunk of their listenership on YouTube and not just on the mainstream podcast platform. So it's definitely something I'm looking into. So where did we leave off? We left off in the story where China was entering a long, hot summer of 1967. In San Francisco, they were having the summer of love. But in that year, in China, things were a bit different. It was a grueling summer of struggle, intrigue, and mass movement that had never been seen in a socialist state, including a massive right-wing uprising in a major city and an order to arm the population in a way that would make the average National Rifle Association chapter shit themselves. So brew yourself up a cup of oolong tea, grab some durian-flavored cookies, settle down, and let's get back to the story. Now, a lot was going on during the first few weeks of June. Factional fighting in between the anti-power seizure and pro-power seizure factions in Nanjing had flared up once again. In Heilongjiang, a group of ultra-left dissidents against the Provincial Revolutionary Committee called the Bombardment Group Red Guards went on the offensive and vandalized the Revolutionary Committee's administrative offices. Chongqing and Chengdu and Sichuan continued to fall into brutal fighting. Shanghai, which had been a rather stable city since the end of the January storm, had some problems with ultra-left Red Guard sects causing hoodlum behavior and engaging in petty vandalism. Mass organizations in Changsha, Hunan province went to war with each other, leaving dozens dead and hundreds wounded in street riots. In response to this, Mao called for a central directive condemning armed conflict and the evil wind of beating, smashing, robbing, confiscating, and arresting. He felt that the armed conflict had gone too inward and that the mass organizations were mainly fighting themselves and not the right wing within the party and army. But Mao's calls fell on deaf ears. It was only about to get more out of control as the summer went on. Mao later went on to reminisce, everywhere people were fighting, dividing into two factions. There were two factions in every factory, every school, every province, every county, even every ministry was like that. The foreign ministry was split into two factions. The foreign ministry was in chaos. In July and August of 1967, nothing could be done. There was massive upheaval throughout the country. Lin Biao joyously proclaimed at one point in July, "The great proletarian cultural revolution has turned into a great martializing revolution." On June 14, a group called the May 16th Capitol Red Guards began circulating dazabaos and leaflets declaring war against Zhou Enlai, saying that he was one of the main culprits behind the February countercurrent. This caused a massive stir within the Beijing Red Guard movement, with pro-Zhou and anti-Zhou factions stepping up their offensives against each other in both the realm of ideas and in the streets. And this May 16th Capitol Red Guard group, well, I'm going to tell you guys a little more about them in our October episode. But honestly, we would be going on all freaking day if I told you guys everything that happened in June across most of China. So let's turn our attention to what I really want to talk about today. In my opinion, the most dramatic of all the major upsurges during summer of '67 has to be the Wuhan incident in central China's Hubei province. Get ready, y'all, because this is one will have y'all's motherfucking jaws dropping at the audacity of some of the fools in this story. Okay, so a little backstory on the city of Wuhan. The city of Wuhan has become a household name in the past 3 years because it's where the first cases of COVID were reported. Remember when we were all calling it the Wuhan virus? Oh, simpler times, simpler times. But yeah, Wuhan is centered smack dab in the middle of China, making it a very strategic place in the economic and political life of China. It has a very rich revolutionary history, as it's the city where the 1911 revolution against the Qing dynasty began and set into motion the foundation of the Republic of China. By 1965, it was a city of 2.5 million people and the headquarters of the Wuhan military region, which oversaw all PLF operations in central China. It had experienced its own January storm and factional struggles across 66 and 67, but like in many provinces, the power seizure was somewhat incomplete. In Wuhan's case, it was because the PLA Wuhan military region was still tightly controlled by a right-wing officer corps. As a result of this, a revolutionary committee had failed to be established, and the city's 54 rebel groups and mass organizations became increasingly polarized between left-wing and right-wing camps. On June 3rd, a headquarters for the pro-PLA and conservative groups loyal to Chen Zhaidao, the general who was head honcho of the Wuhan military region and de facto leader of Hubei province, coalesced and declared themselves the Million Heroes. According to Mao's Last Revolution by MacFarquhar and Schoenthal, they took the name Million Heroes in view of the claimed size of its membership, 1.2 million, although, just my note, according to Maurice Meisner, this was more around 500,000, and was drawn mainly from the party. 85% of Wuhan party cadres were apparently enrolled in it, and from government, trade union, and youth league cadres and rank and file, along with older workers and the People's Militia. Some of the workers belonged to a Red People's Militia created by the Wuhan City People's Armed Police Department in January, and as such constituted the fighting arm of the Million Heroes. Pitted against them were the Workers' General Headquarters, the radical pro-CCRG faction that was made up mostly of younger workers, students, peasants from the surrounding countryside, and the troops from the local Air Force base. Just so you guys know, the Air Force tended to lean more left-wing than the Army or Navy during the Cultural Revolution. And the workers' headquarters, they claimed the same number of adherents, about 1 million. Although, again, Meisner says they were about 500,000. Clashes between rightists and leftists had already drawn blood in May, but by June they were fighting each other and building-to-building fighting with lances and knives. On June 24th, the Million Heroes captured the headquarters of the Workers' HQ and killed 25 of its members and arrested thousands of Red Guard activists aligned with them. Oddly enough, despite their leadership being more aligned with Liu Shaoqi and Deng Xiaoping, the Million Heroes often proclaimed that the Workers' HQ was the rightist group because they had insufficiently criticized Liu and Deng in their dazabaos. Sneaky, eh? The amount of bloodshed coming out of Wuhan had begun to rival even that of Sichuan, or the southeast of China, and this deeply concerned Mao and the CCRG, causing them to feel a need to take direct action. Indeed, one Chinese report from the 1980s said that the Million Heroes attacks on Workers' HQ positions had caused 108 dead and 2,774 wounded. Much of the city's infrastructure had been destroyed due to the fighting, and the city's industrial output and military capability had been paralyzed by the battles. Jianqing cabled to Chen Zidao, urging him to cease the senseless violence, disavow his association with the Million Heroes, and informed him that soon Mao would call for both sides to the negotiating table in Beijing. A ceasefire was called, but the drama was just beginning. Zhou Enlai went to the Air Force Ministry in Beijing with Xie Fuji and Wang Li to meet with representatives of the two factions, after which Xie and Wang flew to Wuhan to be the public face of the negotiations, arriving in the city on July 16th. Things got a little crazy immediately because Wang wanted to go out into the streets and check out what all the dazabaos and posters around town were saying when he, Xie, and their entourage were spotted by crowds. It was like the opening scene in A Hard Day's Night where the screaming throngs of girls are chasing hysterically after the Beatles. People rushed after Wang and Xie, cheering and waving little red books, red flags, banging cymbals and gongs, joyously welcoming the chairman's representatives. Xie was actually pretty angry at Wang for this, saying he had attracted undue attention. Mao, Zhou, Xie, and Wang had drawn up a summation of the fighting in Wuhan and what they felt needed to be done. The four main points of their communique concluded: 1. The Wuhan military region had committed an error in general orientation in the course of the Support the Left campaign and had in fact not supported the left. 2. A decision by the military region to outlaw and disband the Workers' General HQ should be publicly rescinded. And 3. The military region should publicly announce that the Wuhan headquarters, which had been labeled as monsters and freaks, were in fact revolutionary. And 4. The Million Heroes constituted a conservative organization. These declarations were read out to the leadership at the two main offices of the Workers' HQ, and on the morning of July 19th, the rebels broadcast the tape recordings of the two men's speeches throughout the city. Chen Zidao later blamed those speeches for triggering the Wuhan incident, by the way, but, that's just his opinion, man. Chen Zidao and the other officers of the military region issued their self-criticisms that morning. But many of the PLA troops aligned with the Million Heroes refused to stand down. By the time Wang Li had finished speaking with the local PLA commissars at 11 o'clock that night, the front gate of the Wuhan military region headquarters was blocked by a group of angry soldiers who demanded that Wang explain to them what he had meant at the speeches at the rebels' HQ. Some of them called Chen Zidao a capitulationist for writing a self-criticism. Chen's own troops refused to carry out Chen's order to implement the ceasefire between the two factions. Soon the compound where Xie and Wang were staying was surrounded by throngs of angry, armed, pro-Million Heroes PLA troops, and there was even a severe fear of a local coup. Chen was pulled out by his former henchmen and beaten savagely for capitulating to the Maoists, and Xie and Wang had to have their bodyguards beat back the attack. However, a couple of nights later, on July 20th, Xie and Wang were finally captured by the mutineers and were held hostage alongside Chen Zidao. With the of a full-scale regional military revolt on their hands, Zhou flew into Wuhan on July 20th and Mao flew into Wuhan on July 21st, escorted by fighter jets to rescue their comrades and defuse the situation. Lin Biao and Zhou Enlai issued a joint statement declaring the July 20th revolt a counter-revolutionary incident, and the Millionaire Heroes were not only a rightist group, but an illegal counter-revolutionary group. On July 25th, special forces from the 15th Airborne Corps, which was loyal to Lin Biao, rescued the hostages and arrested the mutineers. In Beijing on July 27th, a mass rally was held with hundreds of thousands of people denouncing Chen and the Million Heroes in Tiananmen Square, with Lin proclaiming victory of Chairman Mao's line within the PLA over those capitalist roaders attempting to putsch right in China's heartland. The Million Heroes organization collapsed, and the Wuhan military region was brought under direct supervision from a specifically chosen group of Maoist officers. But factional fighting between the remnants of the Million Heroes and the now in-charge Workers' HQ continued until May of 1968. The Wuhan incident shook the Central Cultural Revolution Group and the broader party center badly. There had been problems with right-leaning units of the PLA revolting here or there, attacking leftists in situations like the Qinghai massacre earlier that year, but nothing was this dramatic. I mean, after all, Mao had just almost lost a full military region to the rightists in this case, and in a far more populated and strategically located part of the country. He was pissed. Mao said to Xie, Wang, and Zhou afterwards, "Why can't we arm the workers and students? I say we should arm them." And Jianqing began popularizing the slogan, "Attack with reason, defend with force," which she got from the factional fighting in Zhengzhou that July, which had resulted in 34 dead. With that, Mao gave the mass organizations carte blanche to raid military armories and distribute handguns, assault rifles, and even bazookas and mortars among each other. Some leftist PLA units even began loaning out armored cars and small tanks to certain factions. I mean, it was crazy, y'all. Zheng Chengchao called up Mao and asked to get in on the action and called for the raising of a workers' armed self-defense force to defend Shanghai. Many in the party center began to call for the general arming of the broader population, especially with the fact of the Soviets amassing large amounts of troops on the Chinese borders, calling for, quote, the Soviet social imperialists to be drowned in a sea of people's war in the event of Brezhnev authorizing a land invasion. Mao and his allies were talking about arming the citizenry in ways that even the most zealous libertarian Second Amendment advocate would hesitate to endorse, except maybe like Del Gribble from King of the Hill. I mean, like, could you imagine Dale Gribble getting in on the Arm the Left campaign? If Chairman Mao says I can get a bazooka, then damn it, I'm gonna get a bazooka. Hell yeah. According to Yang Jishang Scholarship, on August 4th, Mao, who was in Shanghai at the time, wrote Jianqing a letter in which he said that at least 75% of military cadres supported the right, and therefore the crucial issue was to arm the left against the PLA. After the slogan "Arm the Left" was raised, violence escalated from fists and clubs to bullets. In the first half of 1967, the large-scale armed conflict broke out in Nanjing, Changchun, Shenyang, Chongqing, Changsha, and other major cities. The whole south of China saw the Arm the Left campaign go wild. Guangdong province's armories got depleted and urban guerrilla warfare in Guangzhou became the norm. In Ningxia and Gansu, Kang Sheng gave Hui Muslim rebel groups permission to storm PLA outposts and begin turning their guns on soldiers who they had deemed as killing innocent Muslim civilians. In Hangzhou, the capital of Zhejiang province, the CCRG-backed Revolutionary Rebel United Headquarters went to war with the PLA and militia-backed Red Storm Provisional Headquarters, revolting resulting in hundreds dead and the loss of millions of rounds of ammunition from weapons factories. Speaking of weapons factories, Sichuan and Shanxi were two major provinces for the defense industry. And because of that, rebels in Chengdu, Chongqing, and the rural parts of our province, Shanxi, got their hands on some super fancy military-grade merchandise, with some scholars estimating that 10,000 mortar rounds were fired in Chongqing alone during the second half of 1967. I know here in Shanxi, while Xi'an was pretty peaceful across June, July, and August, the August in rural Shanxi got really bad, like just silly. It didn't help, of course, that who Mao saw as the left and who individual PLA generals saw as the left were often quite different, with PLA generals choosing to arm conservative organizations, and with all that entailed. Things had gotten so crazy that people started fleeing to Shanghai, a city that was still experiencing relative calm and stability. By the end of the summer, 15,000 refugees were living in Shanghai, and thousands more from around the country were calling into refugee liaison stations in the city, inquiring on the possibility of applying for refugee status. Just to give you guys an idea of how vast this fighting went, I'll cite Yang Jishang again. According to incomplete figures, as of September 1969, mass organizations had seized 1,844,216 weapons, and 2,131,036 weapons were reclaimed from them. These included 10,266 pieces of heavy artillery, and 14,822 were recovered. 442 million rounds of ammunition seized, and 340 million rounds recovered. 390,642 artillery shells seized, 290,000, and 2.7 million hand grenades seized. Yikes. So yeah, now the all-around civil war of May of 1967 was a true war, with tanks and planes and guns being used in factional fighting between mass organizations and Red Guard factions on a daily basis. This is it, boys. The Cultural Revolution had become a true and utter clusterfuck. Okay, so let's move on to our next story of summer of 1967, and this is pretty wild too, y'all. The sacking of the British embassy in Beijing on August 23rd of 1967. So you guys might remember how during this whole time, pro-Beijing Maoist rebellions kept breaking out in Hong Kong. Well, on August 20th, Crown authorities in Hong Kong had shut down multiple communist newspapers and arrested the staff. In protest, the Chinese cabled the British embassy and told them to release all communist journalists in Hong Kong being held within 48 hours, or else. Or else what, you ask? Well, let's hear it from the British Chargé d'Affaires, Donald Hobson, who was there. As night fell, the crowd outside increased rapidly in numbers. The official Chinese report put it at 10,000. They were quiet and orderly, sitting down and packed tight in their ranks, while the preparations for the drama were made. Searchlights and loudspeakers were beamed at our building, and a sort of proscenium was rigged up over our gateway. There were speeches, recitations, songs, and a rather festive atmosphere prevailed. We did not know that the audience were later going to take over the role of actors in the grand finale. We dined together in the office hall of a dinner of tinned sausages and peas, claret and biscuits and cheese, prepared by the ladies. After dinner, I went to the first floor to play bridge, while those of the staff who were not at work watched Peter Sellers in a film entitled, not inappropriately, The Wrong Arm of the Law. At 10:30 p.m., I had just bid 3 no trumps when I heard a roar from the crowd outside. I ran to the window, which looked over the main gateway, and saw that the sea of masses had risen to their feet and were surging like an angry sea against the wall of soldiers who linked arms 3 deep before the gates. It was an extraordinary sight which shall remain imprinted on my memory. Card players, film goers, and all 23, including women, moved at speed into the area on the ground floor, leading to the secure zone. Outside, the crowd broke the glass of the windows, but the bars and shutters held. The mob then started to burn straw at the windows. We threw water through the gaps, but the room began to fill with smoke. Smoke in the room was making breathing difficult. We could see the glare of many fires, and now it was clear that the mob would soon be through the wall, and there was a danger that we would be burned alive if we stayed. I gave orders for the emergency exit to be opened. The mob greeted us with howls of exultation and immediately set about us with everything they had. The time was then about 11:10 p.m., barely 40 minutes since the attack began. From that moment, we were split up, except the girls, who had all had 1 or 2 men with orders to stick by them. We were haled by our hail, half strangled with our ties, kicked and beaten on the head with bamboo poles. I do not know how long this lasted, but I found myself eventually more or less out of my feet by what turned out to be the side gate of the compound, though I had little idea of where I was at the time. Most of the staff who had been at the office had similar experiences of my own. Some were paraded up and down the street, forced to their knees and photographed in humiliating postures. All were beaten and kicked, and the girls were not spared lewd attention and prying fingers of the mob. Most of those who were wearing wristwatches had them removed, and shirts, trousers, and knickers were torn. So much for the morals of the Red Guards. Most of the staff were eventually rescued by the People's Liberation Army and plainclothes police agents, and put temporarily in police boxes as I was. The embassy is a total loss, though the strong room was untouched. All official transport was destroyed except the heavy lorry and 1 bus which we kept for emergencies in a garage in the international compound. My house was sacked and its contents, including all of my clothes, were destroyed. The signed photograph of the Queen, which I had earlier placed in the security zone of the office, survived, though slightly singed. Dang! Pretty crazy, huh? Damn British imperialists. You gotta taste of their own medicine. Well, in response, Zhou Enlai, who was furious at the sacking of the British embassy, had Wang Li dismiss. Mao said of Wang and his clique, "Wang Li, Guang Feng, and Qi Benyu are bad people. They are turning the Cultural Revolution upside down," and told Zhou to have them arrested for ultra-leftist excesses. Wang Li and Guang Feng were arrested and told to write self-criticism, but Mao and Zhou decided to hold off on arresting Qi for now. I'll get back to those guys at a later date because they're kind of an interesting bunch. In October, during our next episode, we'll be discussing them. Well, our next chronological episode, we will be discussing them, the May 16th conspiracy, and the continuing spread of the Civil War across China during the autumn and early winter of 67. But let's put a bookmark there in our stories, and next month we will have a thematic episode about Xinjiang and Tibet for you guys. So I had some thoughts I just wanted to fire off to you guys as a conclusion piece for today. What do you guys think of this? So, in his text, Failure of Charisma, The Cultural Revolution in Wuhan, Chinese political scientist Wang Xiaogong states, in the case of the Cultural Revolution, it was Mao who opened the floodgates of social control. If he had not done so, the latent tensions in Chinese society might have persisted for decades without finding expression in open conflict. And this brings up a thought I've had for a while there, and that's as rough as the Cultural Revolution sometimes got, especially in the first 2 or 3 years. If the GPCR had not happened, would these tensions ended up causing a collapse of the People's Republic and an upheaval that would have actually cost far more lives? I honestly suspect it would have, because, if you know Chinese history like I do, when China collapses, it gets ugly. Just example, see the massive civil wars that happen every time there's a dynastic change in ancient Chinese history. Those often rack up body counts in the tens of millions. I don't want to be too utilitarian of thinking about the greater good, and I'm not trying to downplay mass killings of any kind, but 700,000 dead in factional fighting versus potentially 20 to 30 million dead in a full social collapse. I think Mao made the right decision. And before we end today's episode, I wanted to clarify something. In the next few episodes, a lot of what I will talk about will get crazy, sometimes downright ugly, as we enter August of 1967 through June 1968. Yes, factional fighting gets to be at its worst at this point in the GPCR. Lots of people die for sometimes silly reasons. But, a lot of great stuff was still going on at that time. Society was still being transformed, and the sky was changing. The PLA was, when not bickering with the Red Guards, helping the workers and peasants and taking part in production and building up infrastructure and the standard of living. The barefoot doctors were bringing free and accessible healthcare to the most remote and backwards parts of China. Red Guards, when not fighting each other, were doing their share in communities and helping with construction projects, transporting food and medicines, aiding in education of the people. Really taking the two slogans, serve the people, and grasp revolution promoting production, and making them a reality. Really, another slogan by Mao, helping people become read and expert. And at the end of the day, from what I've heard from old folks here, for the most part, and for most people, life continued on as usual. If you weren't directly involved in factional fighting, or if you weren't a deliberate target of the rebels, it usually didn't concern you, except in different times, different cities. But, for large swaths of China, it just really wasn't a thing. So, as we move into the bloodiest period of the Cultural Revolution, please keep all of this in mind. At the end of the day, even at its absolute worst, even at its most horribly excessive, the Cultural Revolution was not the horror movie that K-12 educational Western textbooks and 1980s Chinese scar literature makes it out to be. So stay tuned. Okay, folks, well, I'm going to roll out. Gonna try to grab some lunch and then hit the gym with the missus. I'll be in Chengdu for a very important conference this upcoming week. And, school year is also beginning this week, so I will be swamped with work. But rest assured, next episode, Tibet and Xinjiang during the Cultural Revolution will be eye-opening and engaging. As always, your criticisms, engagements, and feedback are always welcome. If you would like to get in touch with me, you can DM me at GPCR Podcast on Twitter, email me at culturalrevolutionpodcast@gmail.com, or join our Discord server, which I'm trying to get resurrected. But until next time, from the ancient city of Xi'an, Zaijian! Today's episode's bibliography includes Mao's Last Revolution by Roderick McFarquhar and Martin Scholl, Agents of Disorder, Inside China's Cultural Revolution by Andrew G. Walder, Failure of Charisma, The Cultural Revolution in Wuhan by Wang Xiaogong, The World Turned Upside Down, A History of the Chinese Cultural Revolution by Yang Jisheng, Turbulent Decade, A History of the Cultural Revolution by Yan Jiaqi and Gao Gao, The Battle for China's Past, Now in the Cultural Revolution by Gao Mobo, and The Politics of the Revolution, a case study by Li Hongyong, and Evaluating the Cultural Revolution in China and Its Legacy for the Future by the Marxist-Leninist Revolutionary Study Group. All right, y'all have a good day, and I'll catch you at the end of next month. 再见。